says that he's never missed an inauguration, and we find out actually he skipped George W. Bush's. That there are points at which we have a right to make sure that we correct the record. I mean, you're talking about integrity, and you're talking about telling the truth and facts.
No, really?
I don't know that it wasn't malicious at all, and I'm not saying, but there's a point at which we have a right to go out there and correct the record. And I think that over and over
Where did I
again,
say this?
This attempt to...
I got into an argument with some dude on Reddit yesterday where I said that the
president and say, well,
alt-right
that
is
can't
the
be
biggest
true, and
correct
that's
the
not
record
right,
memers.
and the numbers weren't there, and there's a rush to judgment every time. And it's a two-way street. We want to have a healthy and open dialogue.
Oh, fuck, I feel like I typed this somewhere. Oh, no.
What he's doing to help this country and to unite it.
Or maybe maybe it was on Twitter?
Unite this, and he keeps talking about uniting this nation, bringing people together. And then a tweet goes out in a pool report to, what, a few thousand people, saying that he removed the bust of Martin Luther King. How do you think that goes over?
Sean, did the media invent the feud between the president and the intelligence community?
Look, I'm not... I think that you saw from
dude.
the response the other day, he walked into the CIA, people were hooting and hollering, they gave him a 5-minute standing ovation. That doesn't look like a relationship that's... I mean, that's a... They were excited.
Media invention.
No, but I think there's a difference between having differences with intelligence leaders and leaders of that community who had strong differences with than the people and the men and women who toil every single day in our intelligence community. And it was reflected at the CIA. I mean, they came there. They were so
There were people
excited.
clapping,
There was
dude.
1,000 people
He's right.
that applied for 300 plus seats. We ended up taking in 400 people. That doesn't sound like a huge feud. They were excited. They were clapping. They were cheering when he walked in. And to see reports that made it sound like there was some, fence mending that needed to happen, that sure didn't look that way when you walked in. I'm going to move on. Yeah.
Sean, can I ask, what is the U.S. strategic interest in moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem? And also, in the chat with President al-Sisi today, was the status of the Muslim Brotherhood discussed?
Well, I think the readout, I just gave you the readout on the call with President al-Sisi, and I think that speaks for itself, what was discussed. And then, I'm sorry, the first part.
What is the U.S. strategic interest in moving the embassy
Well,
from
I
Tel
don't,
Aviv to
as I've
Jerusalem?
noted yesterday through several press inquiries, there's no decisions. We're at the very early stages of that decision-making process. Yeah.
John Soper from BBC. Will there be a detailed discussion when Prime Minister May comes on Friday on the potential parameters of what a trade deal might look like? Is there going to be a joint news conference, and is Donald Trump going to get a state visit back to the UK later in the year?
Well, look, we're here on working day one. We're excited that Prime Minister May is coming on Friday. We look forward to it. I'm sure that there'll be a discussion of trade. We'll come up to the degree to which I don't know yet. And I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to brief you out. I don't believe we have any plans right now for a joint press conference. But that's something that our team will be working out with Prime Minister May, and we'll keep you updated on that. Yeah.
Terry Yates, One American News. After the executive order withdrawing the U.S. From the TPP, what specific steps will President Trump take to expand U.S. trade opportunities abroad?
Well, again, I think when he talks to Prime Minister May, he's going to have a great conversation about the potential for greater trade with the UK. I mentioned earlier when he met with these manufacturers this morning, that was right up there at the top of that list. How can we get greater market access? What are the specific challenges that these manufacturers are facing getting market access into countries around the globe? And that's an important issue. So it's not just other countries, but within existing trade deals, we can figure out, is there a trade dispute that can be settled at the WTO? Is there a revision to one of the existing trade treaties that we have now? But there's a lot that can be done. There are things that Congress can update to make sure that we're importing and exporting more to benefit American businesses.
Thanks. John Christopher Pugh, Talk Media News. Has the president, or will the president, have a chat, even an informal chat, with the Prime Minister before, in fact, she comes here?
There are no plans for that now. It's always possible. He's been having a tremendous number of calls. I think the number is well over 80 now of people that have talked to him, congratulated him prior to being elected. He's had, we read out the other day, he's met with both Canada and Mexico. I think he's talked Prime Minister Netanyahu yesterday, President al-Sisi today. I think there's going to continue to be a robust number of world leaders. There's a tremendous excitement, I think, in the diplomatic corps and at the world leader level of people who are excited that President Trump and this administration want to engage there's a lot of times when he's talking to these folks and they're saying, I have not heard from anyone in years. And I think that there is a genuine excitement to re-engage the United States, especially in the area of trade and other economic interests, but also in the area of national security.
The big one, and it's the first. So,
I'm sorry?
I said, needless to say, this is the big one, and it's the first.
Right.
Special relationship.
TPP was dead on arrival going to Congress. So why is this executive order anything more than symbolic? And when will President Trump start negotiating those bilateral deals with the 11 other countries in the Asia Pacific? Because it takes some time, and that could be, some would say, giving China, room to make an inroad.
Well, first, I would argue that bilateral deals are mostly what China's been engaging in. And that's something that I just said that we're going to engage, the president's going to look to countries to engage with.
Those 11 TPP countries.
Most of them we have existing trade agreements with, or a good chunk of them we have existing trade agreements to begin with. This was an expansion of that, and in some areas it allowed, whether it was the service industry, financial services, additional market access. But I think that this is not a deal that was in our country's best interest. The president could have come into office, a president could have come into office and renegotiated it and sent people back to the drawing board. It hadn't gone to Congress yet because it wasn't finalized. I think this president pulling out of the agreement is not just about this one agreement, but I think it's symbolic, both here in America and around the world, of a new era of trade policy, one that's going to put American workers first and foremost, and one that assures the rest of the world that the way that we negotiate bilateral agreements is going to ensure that we get something out of these deals. As I mentioned to John a minute ago, I mean, the problem with multilateral agreements is that often it becomes the lowest common denominator on so many things. And for the U.S., which already has low tariffs and other service industry benefits for countries, we've got to be able to make sure we're going out and fighting for the American worker. Jennifer.
If you're not going to renegotiate, to be clear,
We've pulled out of TPP.
No, but of all the existing
I'm not going
deals
to. We'll have further updates on trade issues later this week. Jennifer.
Does the administration feel like you still need an executive order to remove yourself from NAFTA, or what's the
That's a great question. I believe there's an action that has to be taken under the provision of NAFTA where you send notice to the other countries, the other two countries. The exact nature of how that's described, I don't know. But there is a trigger within NAFTA. One of the sections allows the President of the United States to notify them that we intend to do that.
allowed or
Hold on, Jennifer.
will there still be a North American trade bloc or something different, or what's
Again, I think part of it is that he's already spoken to both the President of Mexico and Prime Minister of Canada about his desire to renegotiate. And I think as he meets with both of these individuals over the next 30 days or so, that's going to be a topic. Now, if they come in and express a willingness to do that, you could negotiate it within the current parameters and update it through the existing structure. If they don't,
How many people do you think
decides
day
to
trade
pull out,
on
then we
these
would have to go back to
conferences?
the drawing table in a
I bet
future.
you there's a lot of money to be made.
Sean, will that notice or trigger be signed
I'm going to make
today?
sure Mara gets a question this time.
Time. Just to follow up on the China question, China actually has a regional agreement called the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, and now Japan and Australia, two of our great allies, are talking about joining that. Does President Trump see a national security component to these trade deals, and is he concerned that now China will write the rules for Asia-Pacific trade?
Well, I think he has been very, very clear about China's place in the geopolitical landscape, both economically and and national security wise. So he understands the need. That's part of the reason that trade is important. Bilateral trade, it provides a check on a lot of this.
I bet there are companies
But again,
that do a lot of
he's always gonna
manufacturing
be
related to
fighting
Mexico
for
that
the
have
interests
huge
of the
swings
country and
in
American
stock
workers.
value
So
based on these conferences.
how we engage and with whom is going to be decided on whether or not we can get a deal that benefits our country economically and in terms of national security. That there are things that we can do economically that actually end up also benefiting us from a national security standpoint because of the economic relationship that exists between the two countries. Yes, sir. Okay. Mara gets a follow-up. No, you earned it.
Just really simple. What is the average national unemployment rate?
What's the average?
What's the overall unemployment rate?
Are you talking
today?
about whether or not we include the full? I mean, the Bureau of Labor Statistics puts it out.
You accept
No,
the
it's not a
Bureau
question of what I accept. I mean, there are ways that you can put out full employment. Right, but I'm saying that so there's a reason that we put out several versions of that. One is that the illustrative nature of how you count the unemployed, whether or not they're long-term unemployed or whether or not they're still seeking a job. But there's a reason that you put out several of these statistics. It's so that economists can view them and decide, look at different landscapes on how to make economic policy.
During the campaign, he at one point, Trump at one point said it was 42%. I just want to
be
clear on where we're starting.
But again, part of it is his economic team is going to look at a multitude of statistics and drive economic policies. His goal is obviously to get as many Americans working together. That's his ultimate goal. Is that when he sees people that are hurting, that haven't had wages lifted up, that are unemployed, that can't save for their kids' future, that are having trouble with their health care costs, that's what he really cares about. It's not just a number to him. It's about, is someone getting by? Are their wages going up? Can they find a better job? Do they have access to education, whether it's higher education, college, or a VOTech kind of school, so that they can train for the skills of the next century? Those are the kind of things the president, he's not focused on statistics as much as he is on whether or not the American people are doing better as a whole and whether or not a family. And it was interesting. I know when we talked about Carrier at one point, someone said, well, that's 1,000 jobs. When you talk about those 1,000 jobs and their families, during the holiday season, I would beg to differ that those people were unbelievably ecstatic that the president and the vice president intervened. And so every one of these meetings that you saw happen at Trump Tower and then now, it's all about, whether it's 2,000 jobs or 20,000 jobs, that's the focus. It's making sure that that small businesses have greater opportunity to be successful, that American workers can have their wages lifted up, that the benefits that they receive in terms of health care and education are something that provide them the support that they need. But that's what this is all about. I think for too often in Washington, we get our heads wrapped around a number and a statistic. And we look at and we forget the faces and the families and the businesses that are behind those numbers. And so I think that's where his head's at, is trying to look at those people that come to his rallies, that have come to his events, that he's met with in person, that are struggling and say, Mr. Trump, I'm working as hard as I can. I'm working 2 jobs, I'm doing everything by the rules, and I keep getting screwed. That's what he's fighting for, is that man or woman out there that's doing everything they can right, but can't catch a break. And I think he addressed that in his inaugural speech when he talked about shifting power outside of Washington, D.C. back to the American people. Because for too long, it's been about stats, Mara, and it's been about what number are we looking at as opposed to what face are we looking at. Yeah, David.
2 questions. One back on DACA. I was just curious about the message from this administration, from the White House, to young people who may qualify and not yet have the protection. Should they enroll going forward, and those who are in the program now seek renewal?
Well, I think, what those people should know is that the president's laid out a list of priorities. And the priorities are focused on making sure that people who can do harm or have done harm and have a criminal record are the focus. And as he said throughout the campaign, we've got a series of individuals that we've got to figure out.
Bad
People
hombres.
overstayed their visas, people have committed crime, and we're going to go through that in a very systematic and methodical way. So for now, that's not, the focus is going to be on people who have done harm to our country. Yes?
2016 was the hottest year on record, and the last 3 years have been the hottest 3 years on record. Scientists are saying that we're getting dangerously close to the point where human civilization is being threatened. How does President Trump plan to address this?
Well, I think he's going to meet with his team and figure out what policies are best for the environment. But I think that there's one of the things that he talked about during the campaign is there's a balance. And he's trying to make sure that we use our resources appropriately, that we maximize things to make sure that we don't do so at the detriment of economic growth and job creation. So there's a balance, and I don't think it's an either-or situation. We can ensure that we're doing things that are smart for the environment and smart for our longevity, as well as making sure that we're doing things that create economic growth and job creation. Yes, sir. Yeah.
Sean, what is the president's message to the millions of people here in Washington and around the country who were protesting on Saturday? And a follow-up after that.
Okay. That's very polite of you. I think he has a healthy respect for the First Amendment.
Except for when he said he wanted to take people that burn the flag and revoke their citizenship.
What makes our country
But
so beautiful
okay.
is that on one day you can inaugurate a president, on the next day people can occupy the same space to protest something. But he's also cognizant to the fact that a lot of these people were there to protest an issue of concern to them and not against anything. I remember this morning Debbie Dingell was on television, and she was talking about, I don't want to inaccurately quote her. I know Jonathan's a stickler for that. She said Different women were there for different reasons, but they were all there to make sure that their core American values are going to be protected. And I think many people like me were there for positive reasons. And I think the president shares Debbie Dingell's views that there were people that came to the mall, as they do all the time, sometimes in smaller numbers. And so I think he reaches out to them in the way that he started on the night that he won the election, on the way that he did on Inauguration Day by sending a message that talks about fighting for them. But more importantly, I think the president's going to show through action and through success that he's fighting for them and fighting for every American. One of the things that we've seen so often in this town is a lot of soaring rhetoric about how much people care. And I think the president is going to show through deed and action and success that he wants to fight for people's health care. He wants to have a better education system. He wants a stronger America. He wants to go in and fix our inner cities. He wants to make sure that our infrastructure, our roads and our bridges. So I think more than anything, showing people through action and deed and success is where he's going to prove to the American people how much he cares to unite us and how much he cares to make this America better and safer.
Follow-up, on the other side of this, another group that's coming.
I forgot you did ask.
I did ask.
That's
Thank
polite.
you for remembering. Another group, and this is a follow-up on CBN's question a moment ago. You know, when we have the March for Life here in Washington, you've said that this is a pro-life president. What concrete promises is he making? We haven't heard a lot about what that policy is going to look like.
It's day one.
Yeah, but you've had a lot of time to make those promises.
I know, but look, I think
what should their expectations be?
Their expectation should be that he's going to stand up and value life, born or unborn. Same as he said throughout the last year and a half, that he's going to stand up and protect life, promote it, and instill policies that promote life, that promote adoption, that help support young women, that help support funding of agencies and clinics that support women's health. I think that's what he's going to talk about, is supporting all of life, the born, the unborn, throughout life, making sure that we have health care that can support the American people and the American families. That's what he's going to fight for, and that's what he's going to be clear on. Anita.
I have two questions.
Okay.
Putting it up there right now. First one, with the congressional meeting today and also at the retreat, you said, talking about his legislative agenda, besides health care, can you give us 1, 2, or 3 legislative things that he wants to get through right away? So not the executive actions, legislation.
Right. Immigration's obviously going to be high on that list. Tax reform, regulatory reform, it's 3 and 4.
Is not a overhaul, though, not what...
Well, I think he's going to work with Congress to get the appropriations process going. But it's not just building the wall. That's through the appropriations process. Is how do we enact policies to make sure that what we have now doesn't happen again? And so it is working with them. It's a comprehensive look at how we're keeping people out of this country that shouldn't be here. The people who are come to visit are leaving when they're supposed to make sure that we're tailoring immigration policies that make sure that we're not an open door for anyone to just walk in, that the people who are here to visit our country safely or to come here to bring jobs or to support our economy are coming in. But I think we have to do immigration smartly, and that's what he's looking at.
And then, no, I had a second one.
I'm sorry, you're right.
I haven't heard that you have said or someone else has said specifically, has the president spoken to any of the intelligence agencies about the investigation into the Russian connections, and will he allow that to go on?
I don't believe he has spoken to anyone specifically about that, and I don't know that he has not made any indication that he would stop an investigation of any sort. Yes, sir.
Thanks, Sean. Clarification. You said you're willing to work with anybody to defeat the Islamic State group. Does that include Bashar al-Assad?
Well, I think what we're doing, we are going to smartly do this. I mean, let's be clear. Part of it is to make sure that they have America's interest in what they're doing and who they are. So we're not going to get together with people under the guise of defeating ISIS if that's not truly their guise, or if they're not. So let's not take that too far. Thank you. Yeah.
Sean, will the president release documents showing that he has left his businesses?
I believe we have. Oh, is he? But yeah, he has resigned from the company, as he said he would before he took office. Don and Eric are fully in charge of the company. He's taken extraordinary steps to ensure that that's happened. Yeah.
The president has taken actions for things aligned to the political priorities. What would be the message for the Hispanic community in the U.S.?
Get out. That's the no, I'm just kidding.
Oh, been the war. What would be the relation between this administration and the Hispanic community in the U.S.?
Well, I think his relationship with the Hispanic community is going to be great. I think as I said, I think that whether it's jobs or education or healthcare, the president's committed to uniting all Americans and working towards a better, safer, more secure, more prosperous America that benefits everybody. And I think, regardless of your background, that's something that he's committed to. Yeah.
Financial Times. Does Mr. Trump agree with Rex Tillerson that the U.S. should try and prevent China from accessing the islands in the South China Sea where it's building runways and other kinds of facilities?
I think areas in the South China Sea that are part of international waters and international activities, I think the U.S. is going to make sure that we protect our interests there. So it's a question of if those islands are in fact in international waters and not part of China proper, then yeah, we're going to make sure that we defend international territories from being taken over by one country. Does that answer?
Would you prevent China from actually reaching?
I'm not going to look. I'm not. I think I answered the question. I think as we develop further, we'll have more information on that. John Gizzi.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. Thank you, Sean.
I'll get to you, I promise.
Yeah. And welcome to your first day on the job.
Thank you.
Very simply, there was an earlier question about Jerusalem and putting the U.S. Embassy there. And a lot of talk about executive orders. Is this something the president can accomplish by executive order?
It is, but I think as I noted, John, it's very early in this process. We're at the beginning stages of this decision-making process, and his team's going to continue to consult with stakeholders as we get there. Yes, ma'am.
Tanya with Lopinion, and thank you, Sean, and
course.
welcome here.
Thank you.
So I have a follow-up on the housekeeping question about NAFTA. Are we not to expect then an executive order today to renegotiate NAFTA, or will he wait till he meets with President Peña Nieto next week? And on the other question I had is, he didn't mention Latin America at all in his in his inauguration speech. Does he plan to visit Latin America this year?
So on the first part, I think we'll have further announcements on trade throughout the week. I think we're done with executive orders for the day. But as I always say, stand by. But we do not have any intention to have additional executive orders today. But I believe there could be some additional ones throughout the week on trade. And we'll have further updates for you on there. And then the second part.
He plans to travel to Latin America, given that he left them out of his inauguration speech.
Well, I don't think I didn't think he left them out. I think he was focused on this country, our American workers. I don't think he got into detail on any countries that I'm aware of that I can recall. But I also think that we're here on the first working day. We're announcing Theresa May coming this Friday. We're excited to have the Prime Minister here. As I said, we've already talked about setting up a meeting with Canada and Mexico. He's talked to Prime Minister Netanyahu about having him come over. And then, as I mentioned, President al-Sisi. So we'll get there. We've got a lot of calls to return. There's a lot of excitement throughout the world and a lot of people who are really excited both to come here and to have the President visit them. Yes, sir.
Sir, last week, another WT writes, the log cabin Republicans, the gay Republican group, delivered a white paper to the Trump team urging the president to maintain an executive order from President Obama barring anti-LGBT workplace discrimination among federal contractors. The president has said he's going to rescind the executive orders from President Obama that are unconstitutional, but will he maintain this executive order barring anti-LGBT?
Yeah, I don't know on that one. I'll have to get back to you on that one. I don't know that we've gotten that far in the list of executive orders, but I'd be glad to get back to you.
President, will we send them?
What's that? It's not. I just don't know the answer. I'll try to get back to you on that one. Yes, sir.
On immigration, the chief of staff, I think, had said over the weekend, seemed to suggest that an executive order shutting down the DACA program had been ruled out. Is that officially ruled out as you guys go forward? Yeah. And does the president support action in Congress that would essentially permanently establish those protections?
Yeah, I think I don't have anything further on the executive action front, but what I think I've asked and answered the DACA piece of this in terms of his priorities right now.
Legislation.
I think that we'll have to. We don't have anything in front of us right now to sign on that. So give us a little bit of time. We'll see what Congress moves forward with, and then I'm sure we'll have a further readout on both the executive order piece and on the legislation. Yes, sir.
What's the status of the refugee resettlement program?
I don't know. I'll have to get back to you on that one right now. Or I think the best thing to do would probably contact the Department of State. Yes, sir, in the back.
Regarding access
access for American companies to international markets. Will the president try to improve the access to the largest market in the world, the European one, by taking up TTIP negotiations or by any other means?
Well, look, I think he's going to increase market access wherever he can. He's in the process of reviewing all of our current trade agreements and looking at potential bilateral options going forward. Whether it's in the EU or in the Asia Pacific arena or in the Middle East, he's going to figure out where we can expand U.S. market access, and that's, I think, what today's decision really starts to show, is that it's not about multilateral agreements under a Trump administration. It's about bilateral agreements where we can figure out country to country, how can we fight for the American worker, gain them access to another market that's going to benefit our large and small businesses who want to sell additional goods and services. Yes?
Sky News. Why did the President choose the British Prime Minister as the first foreign leader for him to meet? And can we take from that that he intends to make the relationship even closer?
I think we've always had that special relationship with Britain, and he's going to, and that reflects in his first visit, in the Prime Minister's first visit here. He's had a great conversation with her, and he looks forward to having her here, but we can always be closer. Yes, ma'am.
Jane with Sky News. What kind of relationship is Trump looking for to build with China after he withdrew from TPP? And on Taiwan's issue, what kind of stance he's going to make on cross-strait relations?
What's the last part, please? Yeah.
Trade relations.
Taiwan number one.
On China, he understands
You guys know
what
that
a big
meme?
market that is for U.S. goods and services. When he met with the head of Alibaba a couple weeks ago, that was part of the point. There's a huge market issue there, but in many cases, it's not a two-way street. There's so many Chinese businesses and individuals, frankly, who can have ease of access in the United States to sell their goods or services. And I think that whether or not you're talking about the financial services or the banking, the other service industries or our manufacturing goods and services, or some of the IP problems that we have with China, that it really is not a two-way street. And so he understands the market that China has, and our desire to further penetrate that market. But he also recognizes there's a lot of concerns with how we are treated entering into China's market, and we need to review that. Yes, ma'am. I think we'll have further updates on that. Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
Jessica Stone from CGTN. Welcome.
Thank you.
Question following on what she was asking about TPP. Part of the thinking of TPP was to encircle China economically, and I wonder if the president has thought a little bit about what kind of bilateral relationships in the region, the trade relationships, would accomplish a similar goal. And secondly, I heard you talking about NAFTA and a trigger, but I didn't hear you say you had triggered the trigger.
We have not triggered the trigger. Hasn't happened. But again, I think we have an existing relationships with many of the countries that were part of the 12-nation makeup of TPP, and I think we're going to continue to explore how we can, in some cases, strengthen those relationships or look for bilateral agreements with nations that we didn't have one through TPP. Yes, sir. Yeah.
Sean, congratulations,
Thank
Bob
you.
Weiner, op-ed writer and Main Street Radio Network. Social Security infrastructure. On Social Security, the President will be meeting tonight with congressional leaders. What's he going to do, given his campaign promise on not touching Social Security, when Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell send him a bill that includes in a funding package various cuts in Social Security? And on infrastructure, has it fallen off the radar screen, or is it going to stay a priority for the President?
So on Social Security, he's going to talk to them. I think he's been very clear what his priority is in terms of preserving and protecting this really important benefit to our seniors. He understands. I mean, Mr. Trump's employed so many people over the years. He understands the struggle that people have later in life to continue to make ends meet. And I think that he is keenly aware of how important this program is to so many people in their later years. And so he's going to continue to fight to make sure that that's a program that is preserved and protected. And then on the infrastructure, of course, yes, that definitely, I mean, he's continued to bring that up. He talked with the business executives today about how so many of our airports that are so important to our commerce system, getting planes to land in and out, roads and their ability to truck things across the country, even our freight system, that if our infrastructure is not strong, it inhibits our ability to have free commerce. It drives up the cost of goods and services when someone's got to take a different route or is limited in the opportunities that they have because a runway might be closed or it can't be expanded or a rail line breaks down. or highways just not the wear and tear he puts on trucks or shut down. So infrastructure continues to be a huge priority for him. Yes, sir.
Yeah, two questions. The National Security Council, the staffing of the National Security
Yeah.
Council, when do you expect to have those positions filled?
We've got many of them filled.
Many of them are.
I'd have to get back to you on the number, but it's actually fairly robust right now. There were a lot of holdovers, but General Flynn has been working diligently with KT McFarland, his deputy, and others to make sure that that's filled out, ready to go. He's had countless meetings with counterparts and had several folks detailed over, but it's a very, very robust effort from day one.
Well, hey, hello, can you hear me? Wait, I heard you type. Hey, can you hear me? Hello? Test, test, test.
Hello?
Hey, hello?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
What's up, buddy?
I'm good, thanks. Sorry for the lisp.
Sorry for what?
My lisp.
Oh, no, it's fine. Don't worry. I have a little one, too.
So I was thinking that maybe we could start off where the other guy kind of left off. So I believe he was saying something about beating up Nazis.
Oh, yeah, I think so, yeah. What country are you from? Just curious.
I'm Polish.
Okay.
So he said some, I'd say just bullshit about how you beat up Nazis because they're Nazis, and you mentioned that how does that not allow you to just justify beating up, say, black people because they're black or whatever?
Sure.
The thing is, I think the guy just phrased it badly, saying, that you kind of identify that because of the political identity of a person being a Nazi, that justifies beating them up, and therefore you could use that for anyone.
Mm-hmm.
However, I would argue that it's not the political identity, it's the goals of the Nazi or the fascist movement in general as being intrinsically liberty-denying. And thus, I do think there is a value to defending liberty from people who want to take it away. And I think it's a worthless liberal...
Are you really defending liberty, though, by sucker punching people in the streets? Like, isn't this liberty that you would rather defend, like, in the court systems or through legislation or politicians?
I'm not exactly going to defend, like, Antifa, because personally I'm not exactly for them. I think that they're generally ineffective. I'm not going to condemn them, because, like, if a Nazi gets beat up, fuck it, I don't care. Like, they deserve it, honestly. I wouldn't really be going out doing that because I don't think it's effective, but if others choose to do it, then sure. I mean, Hitler himself did say that if the enemies of his movement understood it, then they would have beaten it up on day one and not let them get the legitimacy and the position they had in the political system. And I think there's some truth to that. I think that when you have something like fascism, it should really be countered and strangled in the cradle. There is very little value to respecting your political opponents. Fundamentally, it's about power. And you do have to be ruthless to a certain degree. I don't think Nazis really deserve that. And since, you're not going to really be waiting till they start genociding people. Fascism could have been debated.
Well,
I don't think Hitler would have come to power, do you? Like, if rational argumentation could have stopped a movement like that?
Yeah, but I don't think the people were in the state of mind where rational argumentation was what they wanted to hear, right? Like, Germany was pretty fucked after World War I. It seemed like they were pretty receptive Like, it seems like the more fucked a country is, the more willing you are to embrace extremist ideals. I say fucked, but how about,
Of
like,
course,
unstable?
economic conditions, people's livelihoods affect what kind of use are susceptible.
Yeah, so I feel like I don't feel like having people running around beating up people that are pointing this out really plays into stopping a movement at all. Like, if anything, I feel like
which is why I don't support Antifa. Like, as a communist, I would prefer for people like anti-fascists to focus maybe on, I don't know, beating up capitalists or something than like irrelevant Nazis that choose to march on the street. Like, they don't really do that much harm. I do think there's some value to like doing it when Nazis are a direct threat to, say, minorities. So say like Battle of Cable Street. Like, I think there was a justified fight against Nazis there when Mosley tried to march through a Jewish neighborhood with his stormtroopers, in inverted commas.
So do you think that it would be okay in the United States of America if we killed everybody here that espouse socialist or communist ideals because they're in the minority? That seems like a scenario that even you wouldn't want to be in, no?
Wait, when did I say anything about killing people like who are a minority of some sort?
Well, doesn't violence inevitably point you in that direction? Like, it's not
No,
just going to stop it.
There is a difference between the violence of, say, a slave owner to the slave and the violence of the slave against the slave owner. Violence is a sword. It is a tool. Can be used in multiple ways.
Yeah, but this is a big problem, I think, that a lot of
the liberator and the tyrant use the same sword.
Sure, but this is a problem that I think a lot of class-based movements have, is that while you might want to analyze something as a class, the individual doesn't perceive something as a class. So when you say that there are, so for instance, when a slave uses the tool of violence against a slave owner, it's different than when the slave owner uses the tool of violence against a slave, right? You agree with that?
Yeah, that's what I was saying.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is I don't think that the individual perceives it as such, where they both perceive it similarly, even if on a class level they perceive it differently. So like, as an example, a lot of white people in the United States, or well, across the world, will talk about things like reverse racism. Even though racism can never really manifest itself against white people in the same way it has against other minorities, it still doesn't feel that way if you're a white person being, I guess, discriminated against or made fun of because of your race.
The reverse racism thing is either just like a right-wing dog whistle, or it is a misinterpretation of the difference between prejudice and discrimination.
I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, though. So for instance, let me ask you this, okay? So if I got on Twitter right now and I tweeted out like I want to kill all niggers or whatever, right? I would probably get banned from Twitter for it, or I would get a warning or suspension, and my thing would be right. But I could get on Twitter and I could start a movement where I do #whitegenocide, and there's no backlash against that at all. If you're
some American professor recently say that?
What?
I think there was. So some American professor like tweeted something about kill all white people or white genocide.
Yeah, it's possible. But I'm saying that, like, as a white person reading that, how do you think that white person feels? Like, I feel like they would feel like, well, this is fucked. This is racism, right? Like,
yeah, sure, but prejudice itself is, I don't think, racism. You know, Stokely Carmichael, I think, said something along the lines of, you know, if a white person wants to lynch me, that's their problem. If a white person can lynch me, that's my problem. You know, like, prejudice isn't nice, but it's not discrimination, and it's discrimination that's the problem. And I think that's what people get at, for example, when they say that racism is power and prejudice, not just prejudice.
Sure. But then you have to keep in mind as well that, like, white people white people are never going to reach the level of fucked that, like, black people were when they were slaves, right? Like, that's never going to happen. So I don't think that white people have that perspective, right? Everything that you feel and experience is relative, right? So, like, for an instance, if a white person were to walk into a college, if a white person were to walk into some college classroom and people were having a discussion about, like, privilege, right? And you see a lot of people on poll get, like, really triggered about these kinds of conversations, right? That might be the extent to which that person experiences, quote unquote, racism. But to them, like, it's a real thing, right? Like, struggling is relative. Much the same way that, maybe somebody, feels really bad because they have they've got, like, an iPhone 4 and, like, the iPhone 7 is out now and they feel like a shitter, and then some people in the world don't even have food, right? I don't think it's necessarily fair to invalidate one person's feelings because their relative experience of suffering is so much different than another person's, you know?
How did we get to this topic? I'm not really sure how it was relevant to what we're talking about in the first place.
I think we got here because you were talking about how using the tool of violence against certain groups is different than them using that tool of violence against you.
Yeah, because I don't think that it's correct to say that all violence is bad.
Yeah, sure, but then I guess to refocus that statement, I guess my problem is that. So I guess when I look for a system of morals or ethics for a civilization or for a people to live by, I would hope that that system can be applied as consistently as possible, right? That's my goal, is that you want to be as consistent as possible because the less caveats or exceptions you make, the more solid your foundation of rule is, right? So when you say something like violence against certain groups of people is okay, the problem becomes that certain groups of people and how different people make that determination. Right? Does that make sense?
I'm not sure if it does.
So let me put it this way. So tell me here, give me an explanation of who you think violence is acceptable against.
I think that violence is acceptable. I take a fairly simple view that, for the greater good, or at least that, the end justifies the means as long as something justifies the end.
Okay, so then let's say that you have a person who is very religious, okay, and they think that the family unit is one of the foundational things of all society, one of the most important things of all society. The family is the cornerstone of all business and everything, right? So this person views homosexuals as literal abominations that are destroying society. How do you tell this person that they're in the wrong for wanting to go around and punch or beat up gay people?
Well, for one, you could use violence to stop them.
Okay, but that's but that's not what you want to do, because in a fight of gay people versus straight people win. There's way more of us. I don't think that.
Yeah, but are you saying that this religious person who believes in the family is representative of all straight people? Like,
for a while, yes. That's why gay marriage was only within the past few years finally. I don't want to say legalized, but made illegal to make it illegal, the way that our law works. But yeah, gay marriage has been a very heated issue in the United States for a long time. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I mean, you say that somehow the idea that different people have different views and ideas change, and that you have to persuade people or fight for rights, somehow invalidates the fact that violence can be used for good?
I think that violence can be used for good. I just think you have to be very, very, very careful at how you define when it's acceptable.
You have to remember that, I know that a lot of liberal kind of perception in America and like in the Western world in general perceives, for example, the idea that, now black people have civil rights or women have civil rights was somehow achieved by like peaceful protest, when in fact there was a lot of violence involved, and the peaceful protest alone would have never achieved the kind of things that have been achieved for minority groups now.
Sure, but I think you could make the argument. I mean, for one, there was a lot of peaceful protesting with that. It's hard to say how much you can attribute to the violence versus how much you can attribute to the peaceful protests. But I do agree that violence probably played some role there. But in those scenarios, you were also at like last resort, right? These were people that were overturning systems of oppression that had existed for generations, right? A long time. I don't know that if you see a minority person, when I say minority, I mean minority of thought, giving some very controversial speech in the street or whatever, that it's acceptable to walk up and just beat that person up.
Well, I think that when, say, these civil liberties that we have are important to me, and when, like, the kind of culture that we have developed of, I guess, I don't know, tolerance and acceptance, you could call it, and the fact that we don't, kill ethnic minorities and shit, that when someone advocates a fascist viewpoint of, say, whether that's racial segregation or ethnic cleansing or white nationalism or whatever, I do think that it's valuable to defend that society, and you can debate them or you can beat them up, and I don't think there's anything wrong with beating them up. I don't think that makes their position stronger. Although I mean,
it sounds like a might is right then kind of thing. Then the person who ends up being right is just the person with the most amount of force behind whatever they think.
No, because it has nothing to do with being correct. But it does have a lot to do with what wins.
Yeah, but I mean, like, if you're in a certain area where the
And when
prevailing
you're
thought...
quite convinced that Nazis shouldn't be winning, perhaps you should actively do something to stop them winning.
I mean, I agree with the actively doing something to prevent, you know, this kind of thing from becoming mainstream, but I feel like I would rather see that kind of thing happen in the minds of people, or maybe even in the court system if it got that far, rather than, you know, vigilantism that can lead to so many other negatives. And then enforce this idea that, like, if you speak, because, like, maybe a neo-Nazi says some shit that's pretty extremist, and you know, ends up getting punched, and that's fine. But I feel like you can start going down the line there. At, like, there are a lot of people that would consider, for instance, the example that I've used before, like Muslims, to be extremist, right? These are people that shouldn't be allowed to have any thoughts whatsoever, right? And you can go down a ton of religions that are like that, where I think these people represent a threat, theocratically or whatever, to my country. So I'm going to go ahead and beat them up. Like, I don't know. I just don't like the idea of endorsing that kind of behavior. It just seems bad.
Yeah, sure, I can accept that. And I mean, I don't actively intend to go up beating Nazis.
Sure, you might not, but you champion the violence. You
yeah,
said
because I think Nazis do deserve to be beat up. I think when you hold these, and I don't think that, you know, these, I have a pity for Nazis, frankly, you know. I do think that they are people who are, you know, take on these ideologies because they are in a desperate situation and they're looking for something to blame.
I guess, like, it just seems like if there comes up a scenario where you are in the streets and then a bunch of Nazis run up and punch you in the face, like, I can't really feel bad for that person. Like, I mean, you got beat up. I mean, but you said that the violence is okay, and that's how you want to solve your problems. Like, I mean,
Hey,
you can't
if
really
not-
get mad if somebody walks up
Yeah.
and clocks you then.
Hey, if Antifa are in the streets and they're beating up Nazis, I absolutely wouldn't hold it against them if they organized to fight us. Like,
But doesn't it-
frankly, bring it on.
But you say that now because Nazis are in the minority. But what if it was something like Christians versus, I don't know what you say on a religious issue, like Christians versus Muslims? Would you want an all-out bloodbath in the streets or straight people versus gay people, where enough very fundamentalist straight people come out and start terrorizing gay people because they've got the majority on their side? That seems like things you don't want to happen, at least in a society where people aren't all killing each other.
I mean, you have to take it in the context of the society we live in, frankly. You don't have these absolute rules that apply everywhere.
You're taking the society that we live in now, like, and now, for the most part, I agree that now we're better than we were, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago. But there are still issues that we have now. Like transgendered rights are something that are very, very hotly contested, that a lot of people would like to go out and beat up fucking trannies, or whatever, go, punch them out and whatnot. And I mean, these are people that are very much in the minority. And even amongst liberal-leaning people, even in the LGB community, there are people there that don't like transgendered people. So, like, I don't know if I would want to tell transgender people, like, well, hey, everybody for yourself. Like, if they've got more people, like, you're just going to lose the fight. I don't know. That just seems like a bad world to live in.
Well, to me, a world where fascists are free to organize is a bad world to live in, because they are exactly the kind of people who are going to be beating up, LGBT people and whatever.
Sure, and I agree with what you just said, but it sounds like you're compromising. Like, how important are your values to protect if you're willing to compromise all of your values to protect them, if that makes sense? It's kind of like the security question. Like, our society is great because we have the ability to have, freedom of thought and freedom of ideas. But if we sacrifice those freedoms to get rid of people that represent a threat to it, how did those freedoms ever matter in the first place? It's kind of a walk around, but it's the same thing as like security theater, right? Our country is great because we have, freedoms to do whatever. And now in order to protect our country, we need to give up all of our freedoms to the surveillance industry, to the NSA and the CIA and everything to protect our freedoms. Well, did they really matter in the first place then if we were so willing to give them up?
Here I would take the kind of Jacobin line from Maximilien Robespierre, where, virtue without terror is impotent, terror without virtue is blind. You need to have a virtuous terror, and there's a value of that. There's no point having these values if you're not going to be terrible and brutal to enforce them. But your terror and brutality has to be virtuous and have those values behind it.
Yeah, but the virtuous and values part is so subjective, and I don't even think today I want majority society deciding what is for instance, do you think that if your thought was applied 150 years ago, like black people would still have nothing, right? Or women's suffrage, I think, was in the very early 1900s in the United States. Like women still wouldn't be allowed to vote, right? How would anybody ever budge you from your position if you're saying that you can enforce these things with ruthless measures?
Wait, what? Sorry?
So if you were to go back a few hundred years and somebody like you still existed then and said that it's okay to use violence to convince people that we believe we're right, wouldn't you perpetually keep these people, like, I guess, in fucked positions, people that we now agree shouldn't be, like minorities or women?
I mean, people with the kind of views that I express did exist back then, and they did fight for the kind of things that I would presume to fight today. If that's what you're asking.
Well, but don't you think the people that if you existed back then, don't you think you would be a little bit more likely to take the side of the slave owner? Or do you
yeah, sure. Like the society we grow up in shapes the kind of person we are and has a profound influence on that.
So wouldn't it be good to have some kind of like built-in protections to your way of rule so that you don't have majorities that are oppressing minorities via violence?
These protections always serve to entrench the system in which they were developed. Like the idea of some constitutional liberal democracies generally serves to precisely entrench the kind of system in which they were conceived.
But it sounds like you're the one that wants to do the entrenchment by saying that the majority thought here can use violence against a minority of thought. Isn't that the definition of entrenchment?
I'm not saying majority of thought has the right. I'm saying the majority of thought always does this, and where we are the majority, we should do this because we should do what is right and what we believe to be right. I don't hold it against anyone to follow their beliefs. We don't choose our beliefs. Our beliefs are in some way enforced onto us. And everyone has a right, in inverted commas, to pursue their beliefs. And as a communist, I will pursue communist beliefs. And Nazis are free to pursue Nazi beliefs, and we'll meet and fight. And as history has always gone, one side will win eventually. And there's no blueprint for this society which doesn't have conflict in it that you seem to be advocating. If we just have the right protections and respect each other's freedom of speech, somehow we'll have this stability. I don't think that's true.
Gotcha. I feel like, I don't know, I mean, I guess I could be wrong as well. I don't know, I feel like society is different now than it used to be, but I guess you're saying that violence is essentially inevitable when you have clashing groups of people, and that, I guess to some extent you have an obligation to your belief or ideology to perpetuate it even if through violence? Is that kind of what you're...
Sorry, I was just checking the lefty call thread.
Oh, so I guess your argument then is that violence is something that has existed and will always exist in history, and you kind of have a responsibility to your...
No, I think that all violence is the result of, in society there is always or almost always a fundamental struggle between people who have differing interests, differing beliefs, those beliefs generally based on their differing interests.
Mm-hmm.
And generally in the societies that we have seen in the past of human history, you have different groups with different interests which generally conflict with each other. They don't want the same things, and as a result they fight. And that's really, that kind of fight generally leads us in the direction of how history progresses, in simple terms.
So you think it's impossible to encourage people that live within the same nation to have, civil discourse with one another, that's a fruitless endeavor, that you should always instead just move towards violence?
As long as people have differing interests, you're not going to stop them. There's no level of persuasion at which you're going to persuade the little guy.
I've never had the desire to go out and punch somebody out before. I've heard some pretty extreme stuff. I don't know.
Maybe you're not getting fucked over as hard, or you don't know how hard you're getting fucked over. There is no level of persuasion, I don't think. And no, that's not exactly correct. If we take the classic slave-master relationship,
mm-hmm.
you have, you can persuade the slave and the master that they can get along.
Sure.
You can. in that relation, and you have the kind of Uncle Tom character.
Sure. I think that for slave master stuff, I feel like it's fundamentally a bit different, because in slave master stuff, you have somebody actually, like, you've moved past, like, giving thought or idea, and you're actually actively, physically oppressing somebody, right? Like, keeping somebody as an actual physical slave. Like, I feel like at that point, you've moved into a slightly different territory.
I think that in our modern society, we have progressed from the kind of slave-master relationship in most places. There's still, slavery around in places, but we have moved on from that. But we still have those kind of relationships. They're simply far more subtle.
Sure. But I think that the subtlety of them means that they're also capable of being addressed in different ways, like via socioeconomic means, via economic policy, via policy at schools or workplaces, or stuff like this. I don't feel like it. I don't know. I guess I can't think of many problems today, at least in the United States, that need to be solved via violence, or that even can effectively be solved via violence. Sorry, go ahead.
I can think of one, and that's the institution of private property.
Shit. Okay, we're getting really extreme. Yeah, that would probably take violence to solve it, but I don't think that I don't think that the prevailing American thought would mean that communists would win in that type of fight.
I mean, prevailing American thought, it's not impossible. America had a very lively communist movement back in the day.
Which one? Or what?
If you look at around World War I and before, the IWW had a very prominent presence. When the October Revolution broke out in at the time Russian Empire, there was a lot of worry that a revolution would break out in the United States. During the Great Depression, the communist movement was very active in the United States, and the New Deal was, at least in part, an attempt by the American ruling class to address some of the economic distress and try and stop a revolutionary uprising. So, it's not something that's unprecedented in America. It's all down to material conditions. And, as the economic situation gets worse, as it is getting worse, you're going to see, currently we're seeing both in Europe, in America, the Western world in general, a resurgence in a kind of right-wing populism, which tries to address some of these economic problems, some of these issues that people see in their lives, their decreasing quality of life, etc. And I think that equally we will see a resurgence in a kind of radical left-wing thought.
You don't think? I mean, does that really speak to the efficacy of, like, communism taking hold in people's minds, or isn't it more just people looking at, like, a kind of like the grass is greener type of thing? Like, for instance, in the United States, I guess during the New Deal era, we were looking more towards left-leaning policies. I say left-leaning, I don't know, but more towards socialist kind of policies for wealth redistribution. Sure. Well, just talking economically, like wealth redistributive kind of things, right? But that's because we were very capitalist at the time. No, couldn't you argue that in a lot of European places now you're looking at the opposite? For instance, like Brexit was kind of an exit of a larger centralized market into a more of an individual kind of capitalist thing, or no?
Yeah, but it's just one capitalism for another. I'm just going to quickly interject here to prevent any misconceptions. There is no socialism is not when government does stuff.
Okay, I guess
if you look at European economies, they are not socialist. They are absolutely capitalist.
Okay, yeah. So just because I don't have any formal education there, I guess when I think of socialism, I generally think of things like wealth redistribution. Is that accurate?
No, that's absolutely no. It's not really about wealth redistribution. Like welfare, for example, and the idea of benefits has very little to do with socialist ideas.
Okay, when you say socialist ideas, what's meant by that then? I'm sorry, because I don't actually know.
Socialist ideas are ones that generally... There's a broad variety of socialist ideas that range from... generally get subdivided into two sections, anarchist and Marxist, broadly. There's some outliers, which people are going to get upset at me about, but whatever. Where socialism, first of all, is not like... I'm assuming that you probably think that socialism is like soft communism or like...
No. I think communism and socialism are two entirely separate things, right? Communism is no private property, workers own the means of the productions and all of that for the most part, right?
Socialism is worker ownership of the means of production.
Okay, then I have no idea. My bad.
Did someone just say that I'm an anarcho-communist in the chat? I'm not.
But don't worry about chat. Chat is full of retards.
But what was I saying? Oh yes. So socialism is worker ownership of the means of production. Communism has generally been defined as a society which is classless, moneyless, and stateless. The stateless and classless are the most important parts.
When you say classless, you're talking socioeconomic as well, I'm assuming?
The idea of class is, class in Marxist terms is one's relationship to the means of production, so one's position in the productive process. So an owner of a factory is